Hi, everybody. So right now, everybody is muted, and if one person could give me or somebody a thumbs up that you can hear me, that'd be great. Okay, perfect. So we're gonna start. I want to welcome everybody. I'm Jenny, and I'm one of Peter's father. I'm one of his daughters. Here's my dad, and I'm speaking to you from Falls Village, Connecticut, where I live with my husband, Alan, and where he and I had the privilege of having my dad live with us for the last 5 years, up until last summer, a little over 5 years. And during that time, he definitely missed his Rowayton friends, and he definitely missed his home, but otherwise, I think he was content and largely happy living here, living in the sort of the country life. On Memorial Day weekend of this year, we buried my father's ashes in a pasture in our just behind our house, next to my mother, Anne, and my dad's brother, John. And there were a lot of us gathered here during that time because our daughter, Hannah, was getting married. So she and her husband, Dave, were here, and a lot of the extended family, but unfortunately not everybody. We had a bagpiper, and we also had a bottle of scotch that we drank in his honor. So today we are excited to have you all here with us and having an opportunity to celebrate his life. We have people 3,000 miles to the west in California and Washington State, and over 3,000 miles to the east in England and in France. We have people as far south as Florida and as far north as Maine. So we have everybody on mute right now so that we have a clearer reception. And towards the end of the program, we would love to hear from anybody that wants to share a thought or a memory. And we'll tell you how to do that when we get to that point. But I'm going to be introducing the speakers throughout our program, and I'm going to be doing that in different chunks. So our first chunk, we have 3 speakers. And the first one is my uncle, Jonathan Paul, who was my mother's brother. And he's speaking to us where he lives with his wife, Gail, from Salinas, California. And following Jonathan will be Joanna Dunlop, speaking to us from Fontainebleau, France. Joanna was a colleague of our father's in risk management at Schlumberger and became a close friend of the family. And then we'll hear from Tori, Jonathan's daughter, and our father's niece. And she'll grace us from Santa Rosa, California, with her beautiful voice. So take it away, Jonathan.
Hello, I'm Peter's brother-in-law, and I knew there was a problem following the bagpipe, which really brings tears to my eyes, but I'll try to get through this. By virtue of the fact that I first met Peter when I was 8, I've known him for a very long time, just shy of 70 years. Now that could possibly be the longest of any of those present. I'd like to offer a few observations about Peter's life and stressing his early years. Peter's father was Lewis Law, was English and French, and his mother, May McIver, was Scottish. He was the youngest of 3 siblings after Margaret and John. Peter was born in Rome, where his father was working in the travel industry. According to family legend, Lewis called his son the Little Wop. There's an interesting story about Peter's parents, Lewis and May. May was a nurse serving in France during the hellish days of World War I. A horribly wounded soldier was brought in. "No hope," said the doctors. "Let me try," said May. She saved his life, nursed him back to health, and they married. The family moved to the US after World War I and lived mostly in Great Neck, Long Island. I remember hearing as a boy that Peter was a wee lad. Entering high school, he grew a foot in 1 year to his 6-foot height. Peter himself became a British naval aviator in the final years of World War II, joining up immediately after graduating from high school from Choate. He received pilot training in Britain, but at 17 years of age, he was too young to receive his daily grog ration, a tradition in the British Navy. In 1945, at the end of the European War, he returned to the US on the Cunard Princess Elizabeth and entered Princeton. In later years, I urged Peter to apply for a pension from the British Navy just for show. He thought the idea was very silly. After graduating from Princeton in 1950, he began his working career teaching history at the Punahou School in Hawaii, but later transitioned to the insurance industry in New York, Hartford, and later back to New York. I first met Peter in the fall of 1952. Peter was my sister Ann's most promising boyfriend at the time. I thought he was really neat. His distinguishing attribute for me was that he drove an English-built Hillman car with mechanical turn signals that popped out on each side with little flags. The fact that he was movie star handsome did not impress me at the time. As everyone knows, Peter married my sister Ann in October of 1953 at the Unitarian Church in New York. At the wedding reception at our Madison Avenue apartment, I was the designated photographer. Bad choice. I was barely 4 feet tall at the time and using a waist-high Rolleiflex camera. All of the pictures, including those of Peter and Ann, appear to be taken from ground level, looking up their nostrils. Peter was exceptionally kind to me over the years, especially as I entered my teenage years when, by all accounts, I was an irritating know-it-all. When he was working in New York, we often took in a Yankees night game, and occasionally we would meet for a, quote, business lunch, unquote, at Sing Long Low's noodle stand around the corner from Aramco's headquarters. I was always welcome at Peter's young family, where I occasionally repaid the hospitality by babysitting. Ann and Peter lived in several places before settling down in Rowayton, Connecticut. They started out in an apartment in Bronxville, New York, followed by several years in Hartford, and then their first house in Farmington, Connecticut. In about 1958, they moved to Rowayton and settled at the longtime family homestead. My understanding was that Peter was an innovative thinker, actually a pioneer in the field of risk management, also known as insurance. He was one of the first to develop the concept of the offshore insurance captive that allowed companies to self-insure. This apparently made him attractive to a number of blue chip companies that hired him during his career: Aramco, Indian Head, and finally Schlumberger. He made a steady ascent up the corporate ladder to become what my sister proudly described as a captain of industry. In his early years, Peter was an aspiring amateur actor. He frequently participated in local theater. I remember he played leading man roles with a poetic British-like intonation. I suspect this was preparation for his later role as Isaiah in the Rowayton Christmas pageant. Peter kindly bailed me out of a ticklish misadventure when I was in college. With no driver's license and no real plan, I foolishly bought a small English car for the princely sum of $150. Peter helped me fetch it from the seller in Brooklyn. The car made it to their driveway in Connecticut where it died. Later, it was discovered it had 5 tires, all of different sizes. The car languished in the law driveway for a couple of years and then mysteriously disappeared. Peter's many talents included a passion for tennis, sailing the family's sailboat, Strega. He was an involved civic leader. He was an omnivorous reader. He devoured the New York Times daily. Finally, Peter was a sincere liberal, supporting all progressive causes and politicians. In short, he was the perfect brother-in-law. I will miss Peter, as I do my sister Anne. I am blessed with wonderful nieces and nephews who fill the empty place in my heart. And I turn the screen over to Johanna Dunlap.
Thank you. That's a tough act to follow. It's been such a treat remembering Peter over the last few weeks leading up to today's celebration of his life. I first met Peter in 1992, I think it was November, and I had joined Schlumberger 6 months earlier as a risk manager. And I quickly learned that Peter Law was my N+1, as we say in business lingo. He was my boss's boss. That was nearly 30 years ago. So that November, he was coming to town and there was great excitement at the prospect of his visit to address business, of course, but also I started to realize to enjoy the pleasure of his company. I remember we took a private dining room in a very smart restaurant, the Louis XIII, and I was quite in awe of the arrangements. It could have been all P's and Q's, but it wasn't because of the level of bonhomie that Peter had created with Chris, our boss, and our whole team. And what I didn't yet know was that I was in for a bigger treat as I was seated next to Anne. And I subsequently learned that each time Peter would visit, he would create a whole that was greater than the sum of the parts. On his next visit, it was Hilary we got to meet. I wonder, Hilary, if you still remember that enormous cheese platter we had to pass around over our heads in this unknown restaurant that Adrian had managed to find for us. I always learned from Peter, of course, technical matters to do with our métier of risk management. But on reflection, what I learned most from Peter was about how to live a good life. This I learned from Peter and also from Anne, as it's really hard for me to think of one without the other, even though I had quite distinct relationships with each of them. In 1998, I was transferred to Schlumberger in New York, having never set foot in the city before. Exciting, but quite daunting too. And I quickly reached out to find a source of comfort. And before long, I was on a train to Rowayton for the first of many visits to Peter and Anne's wonderful home, which I loved for its welcome, its creativity, and our wide-ranging conversations. And that's when our relationship became a friendship. When I met the family and became friends with Hilary and Anthony, even got to work with Jenny at one point, and of course heard often about Stephanie far away in California. I moved back to France, but we didn't lose touch. On each US trip, it would have been unthinkable to not find a way to head to the Northeast and visit the Laws, as many of them as possible. And my Zoom backdrop here shows one particularly happy gathering just after Oliver was born, when I brought my daughter, Anna, to the US for the first time and to meet the Law clan. So thanks to that crossing of paths 30 years ago, professional relationship grew into a friendship, and indeed one that embodies perfectly, in my view, the definition of a family friend. Always with Peter, one received a whole that was greater than the sum of the parts. So thank you for inviting me to share some recollections and impressions of Peter. I think of him and I hear his raspy. Sorry. I hear his raspy, hiccupy laugh, and I see the glint in his eye, and I feel so thankful to have known him. Thank you. Sorry, I meant to be introducing Tori. Tori's next, sorry.
When Jenny asked me to sing, I thought about, what would be appropriate. And Oh, How I Hate to Get Up in the Morning didn't seem quite fitting, although it was one of Peter's favorite songs and always makes me think of him. But Peter was a Judy Garland fan, and so Somewhere Over the Rainbow seemed a bit more appropriate. Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. Somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. Someday I'll wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where troubles melt like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. That's where you'll find me. Somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly. Birds fly over the rainbow. Why, oh, why can't I? If happy little bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow, why, oh, why can't I? Love you, Uncle Peter.
Thank you, Tori. That was so beautiful. And between Jonathan and Joanna's tears, I've used up half my box of tissues. The next group of speakers, I have 3 more speakers that I'm going to introduce. The first one is going to be Hillary, my sister, and she's going to be speaking to us from Boston, Massachusetts. And my father had 7 grandchildren at ages, I believe, right now, from ages 11 to 35. And we're going to hear from 2 of them. So following Hillary, we're going to hear from Hazel, who is Hillary's daughter, and she's also speaking to us from Boston. And then we'll hear from Molly, who is Alan's and my other daughter, and she'll be speaking to us from Pittsfield, Massachusetts. Okay, Hill.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for being here. It's a joy to see so many faces and so many people that I haven't seen in a gazillion years. It's just incredible. I'm going to speak to you today about my father's unique qualities of tenderness. Of course, he was just a regular dad, no softie or anything. And as a child, I didn't notice that he was especially kinder than other people. But as an adult, and particularly as a parent myself, I often found myself referencing my parents, and in particular my father, in my decision making. He was calm, almost always level-headed, and scrupulously fair. I found my father to be uniquely non-judgmental, not because he was trying to be good, but because he genuinely did not see the shortcomings of others very often. Don't get me wrong, he knew a blowhard or a braggart when he met one, but despite that, he was often heard to remark, "Oh, he's a nice chap," or "What a pleasant woman." Whether it was someone he'd known for years or the guy that pumped his gas for him, who he'd had a brief conversation with months earlier, he was never interested in lineage, but always appreciative of a kind and polite interaction. And if it was humorous, all the better. As I grew up, I often heard, "Oh, your father loves babies." That's what my mother used to say. Apparently, even a crying baby was fine with him. He liked to hold them and was happy to pace the room until they settled. I suppose I saw him do that at times with my nieces and nephews, but I don't remember. And I never really got that it was anything special until, of course, until I had my own. My dad and Hazel had a unique relationship from early on. My dad, she recognized him within just a few weeks as that guy that made that clucking sound at her. Granddad was a very early word of hers until one day he became Din Din, and Din Din he happily remained for the rest of his life. Make of it what you will, but it's the truth. My father would do almost anything Hazel wanted him to, and in any weather. They often headed down to Roten Point to swim, but it was as well not unusual to see them heading out in a sleet storm after just having come in from sledding for an hour to play Indian camp, which entailed sitting on the frozen ground under the forsythia, acting out some long scenario a la Little House on the Prairie as the temperatures dropped. As she grew older, their relationship remained strong, and it was he who she looked forward to seeing next. Last year, rushing to visit the day after her COVID quarantine was over. And finally, I will never forget the moment at about age 3 while they were playing and she unconsciously called him Dad. I, a little shocked, smiled as he glanced up to me and winked. What could have been such an awkward moment was diffused instantly by his comfortable and kind gesture. Lastly, those in my family know well that my mother's side of the family cries easily, especially over sentimental moments, sappy movies, favorite stories. And, you know, it's a good chance Jonathan is still crying right now. But honestly, I often found that when it came to matters of the heart, my father felt them deeply and was not immune to tears, shedding one for a lost or dying friend, a change of life, or a misunderstanding that hurt my feelings. Although a man of a generation where bravado was valued, I found his strength proved to come from his kind, tender, and gentle nature. He was a rare chap, and I do miss him quite dearly. Thank you. And now you're going to hear from my lovely daughter, Hazel.
I'm Hazel, and I'm going to try to keep it sort of brief because people couldn't tell yet. I am very much related to my grandparents. I found it really hard to figure out what I wanted to say today about my grandfather. So much of what I miss and love about him was the really small things that maybe didn't really feel big enough to merit a memorial topic. But through talking with other family members recently and hearing their favorite stories and thinking about my own favorite memories, I was reminded that those small things are what are so important. My grandfather seemed to have an unhierarchical relationship to joy. It was uncomplicated, even in the face of a complex and busy life. He loved oysters and lobsters on Memorial Day, fancy restaurants, going to the US Open, and vacations to foreign countries. But those great joys didn't seem to diminish his love and appreciation of a fresh half-gallon of butter pecan ice cream, tennis at Roten Point, a home-cooked meal, and sitting outside in the evenings. I was often the recipient of this gift of turning the mundane into something special. In the beginning of 2020, I flew with him on what ended up being his last trip to California. We were sitting on the plane, running down the drinks menu for the morning, and he asked me what I was going to have. I responded that I thought I would have tomato juice, and he looked at me and said, "Oh, Hazel, why don't you get something special like apple juice?" It wasn't that he didn't love tomato juice, because as many of you would know, it was an essential part of any morning in both Rowayton and Falls Village. But he believed that you should take in all life had to offer. And at that moment, juice was what was being offered. I explained to him that I never got tomato juice, so it did feel like a special choice, and he sort of shrugged and went back to his New York Times and coffee. I don't often sit and reflect on people who I have in my everyday, but since he passed, I've thought a lot about what I wanted to carry on from him. He didn't rush past these little things that can get lost in a busy life, and I hope I can continue with that care and genuine appreciation. And I think now we're going to hear from Molly before I start crying.
Thank you, Hazel. The first thing I would like to say is that my parents, Jenny and Alan, are some of the strongest and most generous people I know. I've experienced that throughout my entire life, but I saw it play out on a daily basis when my grandparents moved into our home in Falls Village in 2015. Although we are here to celebrate the life of my grandfather, I think I would be remiss to gloss over the challenges that come along with reconfiguring a home in order to bring in elderly parents. The most notable of these challenges being Granddad's tendency to take more than his share of sweet treats and to sneak ice cream in the middle of the day. Yes, I did walk in on him doing this one day, at which point he looked at me sheepishly, and I quickly assured him that I wouldn't let my parents know that I saw him eating directly from the carton. Through all of these challenges and tough transitions, I was given the gift of the opportunity to have a relationship with Granddad. Growing up, I was very shy, particularly around family, and I never felt a strong connection to either Annie or Granddad. As I got older, I began to respect the adventurous lives that they had created for themselves, and I always loved listening to their stories. However, it wasn't until they moved in with us that I really began to get to know them. Unfortunately, Annie's time in Falls Village was short, and for most of it, I was not living at home. Yet the relationship I've built with Granddad over the past 5 years, I consider to be very special. Spending time with Granddad meant driving him to his history and political classes at GEAR, eating Chinese food with him for his birthday lunch, hearing his stories about flying planes in the war, and learning to make a gin martini, Granddad style. More recently, it meant him watching my mom and I play cards at night, hearing him sing along to songs on the speaker, and seeing him light up at the food choices during our weekly international themed dinners we had at the start of the pandemic, especially the cocktail and dessert choices. One story in particular I would like to share happened in the spring of 2020, during the start of the pandemic, when I drove him to visit Hillary and Hazel in Boston for the weekend. I'm a big podcast listener, especially history podcasts, and I knew Granddad also liked history. So on the drive there, I chose one with him in mind. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I think it was something about women during World War II, and another one about the Civil Rights Movement. For me, this was a great way to learn some new historical facts while taking a long drive. For Granddad, it was a trip down memory lane. I remember several points during the drive when I thought he was sleeping, he would suddenly blurt out, "Oh, I remember that," or, "Oh yeah, so-and-so was an interesting character." I found it and still find it so cool that he lived through so much, remembered so much, and even at over 90 years old, he was actively listening to the podcast when he really just looked like he was sleeping. When I went to pick him up from Boston, it was going to be a late night drive, so I needed something more upbeat to keep me awake. This time I chose a Spotify playlist filled with show tunes. He sang on and off for almost the entire 3-hour ride home. It was so much fun to hear him recognize the song, hum along to the verses, and belt out the choruses. We sang together for some of them, but he took the spotlight for many more that I had never even heard. I miss Granddad and his warm welcome every time I walked in the door. But I know he couldn't have been luckier than to spend his last years in Falls Village. Sitting on the porch and watching the day go by was all he needed to feel at home and at peace. I am so glad that I got to, at least in part, experience that with him. Annie and Granddad valued history, education, liberal and progressive politics, and seeing how the place you hold in the world can start conversation and hopefully affect change. He and Annie taught this to their children, who in turn helped teach it to me. So the last thing I would like to say is Happy Juneteenth. For those of you who don't know, Juneteenth is a day commemorating the end of slavery in the US. On this day in 1865, over 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, a Union general passing through the state finally informed slaves in Texas of their freedom. The economic success of the northern US, the South, and the Britain was deeply tied to the slavery economy built on the backs of African slave labor. Without this white supremacist system, the generational wealth, the legacy my family holds, and the opportunities that it has afforded me would not be nearly as strong as it is today. Please take this day to remember and celebrate my grandfather, but also hold it in remembrance of the terrible toll that slavery took and continues to take on this country. With that, I would like to pass it back to my mother.
Thank you, Molly, Hazel, Hillary. Those are wonderful words. The next speaker will be Anthony. And Anthony is my brother and the youngest of the 4 law children. And he's speaking to us where he lives with his family in New Haven.
Hi. Hello. Thank you all for sharing this celebration with us. For me, it's fitting to do this today on the eve of Father's Day, as that's how I knew Peter Law, and he loomed large in the role. He's not the first dad, I suppose, who was a giant to his son. Some years ago, I wrote my dad a Father's Day card in which I thanked him for being an inspiration and for modeling what I saw as a life truly well lived. I can't precisely recall what I wrote, but I most valued his love and dedication to family, friends, and community. He taught me without words, but in deed, that these are the things that mattered most. When I hear the phrase pillar of the community, my father comes readily to mind. I was in elementary school when the Continental Can Corporation purchased the former Thomas School property in Rowayton with plans to construct an enormous corporate headquarters. My father galvanized and helped lead opposition to these plans as out of step with the character of our little town for decades. After that, he volunteered in many roles protecting and improving the quality of life in our community, serving multiple terms as the town's commissioner, leading the Rowayton Civic Association on the board of the Norwalk Land Trust, as a docent at the Norwalk Maritime Center, and as president of the board for the Rowayton Point Club. Going back further than that, in the wake of President Kennedy's assassination, he helped our grieving community stage its first production of the Nativity pageant, as Jonathan mentioned. And he played the prophet Isaiah for another 50 years. And as you know, going back even further, my father was only 17 when he enlisted in Britain's Royal Navy during the Second World War. While it gives me great pride to list these examples of community service, to my extremely modest father, this is just what one does. This is the man who visited his older brother without fail when Alzheimer's confined him to a nursing home, who held hands and kept company at the bedside of his dear friends, Tom Cohn and Dave Reynolds, when they were in their last days. It's who he was. Thinking of community and lending a hand, I wanted to tell a family story that dates back to when I was a toddler. One early evening, my parents and some friends were enjoying cocktails in our backyard when they heard shattering glass down on Jacob Street, just below our yard. Running down to investigate, my father and another dad caught our neighborhood's local toughs, the Dorn boys, smashing bottles. Rather than turn them into the police or their parents, they got brooms and made them clean up the glass, which I think is a good civic lesson. But so began the Dorn's retaliatory reign of terror. Assorted pranks and vandalism, including padlocking the mailbox shut, spray paint, M80s, and even briefly kidnapping my sister Jenny. She was released, but and is fine, but hasn't forgotten the ordeal. If you fast forward some months to when my dad was driving into Darien with Stephanie and Jenny in the old Volkswagen bus, a couple of kids were hitchhiking along Tokenique Road, and he stopped to give them a lift, as he would. He didn't recognize them, but as they got out at the end of the ride, they called out, "Thanks, we'll remember that." Jenny and Stephanie clued him in that those were the Dorn boys. And from that day forward, the mischief ended. There's a slightly transactional side to this story, but I like to think of it karmically. Do what is generous and what's right, and things will work out. My dad gave of himself and did what was right always. And we're all the better for it. Thank you all.
Thank you, Anthony. And I'm here, everybody. I'm okay. It was a little traumatic when I was kidnapped, but I turned out all right. As you heard from Anthony and from a number of people today, that my father played the role of the prophet Isaiah in the Rowayton Christmas pageant. He did this from 1963 to 2013. It was common on the day of the pageant to hear our father wandering the rooms of the house and reciting his lines, comfort ye, my people, saith your God." His final pageant was in 2013. In his final years, he suffered from short-term memory loss. But his lines of the prophet were embedded in his long-term memory. And on Christmas Day in 2018, so 5 years after his last pageant, I sat him down in the rocking chair and I recorded him. He didn't miss a beat. And we thought that you might enjoy hearing that right now.
Comfort ye, my people, saith your God. Speak ye comfortably to Jerusalem, and cry unto her that her warfare is accomplished, her iniquity is pardoned. For she hath received of the Lord's hand double for all her sins. The voice of him that crieth in the wilderness, prepare ye the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain and hill made low. And the crooked shall be made straight, and the rough places plain. For the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it.
Our next speaker is Stephanie, the oldest in the family. For those of you that don't know, our father's middle name is Peter. His first name was Stephen, spelled with a PH. So Stephanie, also spelled with a PH, and the firstborn was named after him. Stephanie is speaking to us from Walnut Creek, California, where she lives with her husband, John.
Hello. I would first like to tell you about some perspective into my father's career that I gained only in the last 15 years or so. I knew that he did risk management and that meant assessing a company's risk and purchasing insurance to cover that risk. But I had already been doing software development of workers' comp systems for about 20 years when he thought to share this story with me. In 1971, when he went to work for USI, which was a large conglomerate with operations in most states, he discovered that every operation was separately paying for workers' comp insurance. And he thought that was crazy and that the company should self-insure their workers' comp coverage. But then he learned that US regulation prevented workers' comp insurance from being provided across state lines. So we had this bright idea they should create a captive insurance company in Bermuda. And this apparently was a novel idea at the time. He told me that there had been captive insurance companies created to cover fire in Bermuda, but that there had not yet been one to cover property and casualty. And of course, captives in Bermuda took off after that. The concept my father had was that the individual companies would send the same premium that they typically paid locally, and they'd send that instead to the captive insurance company. Well, this idea had a lot of pushback from the individual companies who were losing their local control. But he went ahead and did it, and things were fine until the claims started coming in, and they were exceeding the premiums that were collected. My father saw the head of the company one day at the elevator who said, "This scheme of yours better work." So my father's future and our future was on a knife's edge for that moment. Now, he didn't know if the local executives were mad about missing out on the golf games and dinners that were treated by their insurance agents, and possibly deliberately sabotaging the effort by underpaying the premium, or if they typically waited until the year-end audit to pay the bulk of the premium. But at the end of the day, there was sufficient premium and the scheme worked. And I believe it's that expertise in self-insurance that got him what was a significant job at Schlumberger, just in time to pay our college tuition. And also was why he was asked by the National Board of Planned Parenthood to create a captive to insure their many local facilities across the US. And which he did in Bermuda. I'm guessing that was the work accomplishment that he was most proud of, because he had a baseball cap with PPIC, oops, excuse me, on the front, Planned Parenthood Insurance Company, that he wore for decades. And it became so frayed and faded that it looked kind of like one of those distressed hats that you pay extra for in the store, but he wore it through distressed and beyond. So I think it meant a lot to him. And you might see some pictures of him wearing that hat in the slideshow at the end of this program. Now I'd like to fast forward to the beginning of 2020, when Jenny conceived of a scheme where my father would come visit us in California for 2 months. I didn't realize at the time she proposed it, the gift that she was giving me. I hadn't spent so much time with him since I went away to college, but I got to understand what a delightful man he was, even his reduced physical and mental circumstances. He was a model for end of life attitude, really. So I'd like to share some of my impressions from that visit. And in case you're wondering about the logistics, Hazel referred to this. He arrived in early January, accompanied by Hazel. And then Jenny came out for a visit in March and accompanied him home just a few days before everything shut down for COVID. Or you might still be here with us. So impressions. We had unseasonably warm weather last year and very little rain. So he sat outside on the patio at least 3/4 of the days that he was here. And he'd look at the clouds and he'd pronounce the day glorious, and he'd read his newspaper, fall asleep in his chair, read his book, fall asleep in his chair. And I'm just so glad that he got to spend his last winter in such hospitable conditions. As you no doubt know, my father was an avid tennis player. I'm sure my mother would have described him as a tennis fanatic. And I took up tennis in my late 30s and have been a self-described tennis fanatic ever since then. And especially with so little rain last year, I had a lot of tennis matches while he was here. And he always asked if he could go and watch. So he did, and not just league matches, but social matches too. And he attended so many of the matches that my teammates also got to know him. And one of them said, "He's like the team mascot." And other than sitting on the patio, that was our main activity. But you could not imagine a less demanding house guest. He never complained, and I was especially surprised at his sunny disposition. He was always humming a tune, or he'd break out in a Scottish brogue and call me lass, or put on other accents. And there are a couple of videos I would like to show you along those lines. My husband, John, had gotten shoes that he thought were extremely comfortable. So we took my dad to get a pair. And for 2 days straight, he was constantly saying, "I just love these shoes. These shoes are so comfortable." And once he said, "These shoes make me feel like dancing," which was a funny idea because my father was pretty hobbled. But I said, "Go ahead, Dad." And luckily, I had my phone handy. That man could dance, even to the end. The next video is of a song he sang every day while he was here, at least once, and to himself mostly.
Oh, how I hate to get up in the morning. Oh, how I hate to get out of bed. But when I hear the bugle blow, I know that I have got to go. I've got to get up. I've got to get up. I've got to get out of bed.
I just love the twinkle in that song, his twinkle. He was just so happy, as long as he had his evening martini, that is. That he was demanding about. So lastly, I'd like to tell you about cocktail hour. Cocktail hour started at 5 o'clock, never earlier, except in special circumstances, like you offered him a cocktail earlier, and preferably no later. And John and my father bonded over cocktails. I would usually be making dinner, so I didn't partake. But my father would have his martini and John would have a Negroni. And actually, we're not in the habit of having a daily cocktail. So John may have been somewhat relieved when my father went home and he could stop drinking. But he joined him every day while he was here. And the night my father died, with him in mind, we had ourselves a cocktail and John toasted to your dad. And every Friday night since then, we've made cocktails a ritual and we toast my father. It turns out we aren't alone in remembering him in this fashion, because my siblings and I were texting each other, and it turned out that each of us with our families toasted our father that night. And Jenny even tried her first martini ever. And Jenny began hearing from many friends who had toasted my father with cocktails that night. And I'm sure there are others here who raised a glass to him, or two. In his mind, two was always better than one. And I can't think of a more fitting way to honor him. So I'd like to suggest that we raise a glass to Peter. And we're on the West Coast where it's around 11 a.m. So it's mimosas here. And John is on his way. He can toast him also. And cheers. And
Cheers.
happy trails, Dad.
Thank you, Stephanie. So some of you might recognize this hat. Here it is. This says PPIC on it. Plan Protection Insurance Company, and all the tatters. I can't bear to throw it out. I don't know what to do with it, but I'm glad I saved it so I could show it all to you today. So that concludes our planned speakers portion of our program. And next, we'd like to offer an opportunity to anyone that would like to share a thought or a memory to do so. I have been to a Zoom memorial before, and this seemed to work. So we're going to give it a try and see how it goes. Right now, everybody is muted but me. And if you would like to share something, just go to the bottom left-hand corner of your screen where it says mute. It says unmute, a little slash through the microphone, and unmute yourself. And then go ahead and share. And if more than one person jumps in at the same time, like in any conversation, we can just, go ahead and wait a turn. When we're finished, we're going to end with a slideshow, which is about 7 minutes long. So before we get started, I just wanted to say that I know that some of you might need to leave the celebration before the end of this portion. And if the great thing about Zoom is that you can just go to the bottom right-hand corner of your screen and click on leave, and you'll be on your way. You don't have to stand up and sneak out the back. You can simply click on the button that says leave the meeting. We hope you can stay, but if not, we wanted to thank you for coming in advance and ask you to please stay in touch. So if you'd like to share, go ahead, unmute your audio and jump right in.
May I go? This is Jeremy.
Go ahead.
Hi. So I'm Jeremy. I'm one of the 7 grandchildren, for anyone who doesn't know me. And at first, I guess wanted to say we haven't talked in this ceremony about the memorial we had a couple weeks ago at in Falls Village. But I just wanted to once again, with my family here, say how perfect I thought that day was, and how much Annie and Granddad both would have loved it if they could have seen it and been there. When I was thinking about this just yesterday, but when I was 10 years old, Granddad took me to a baseball game at Yankee Stadium, and I was more than obsessed with baseball. So you can't imagine a better activity than going to a baseball game with your grandfather. And at one point during the game, Granddad pointed up to the upper deck bleachers in right field, and he said,
Lie down.
he said the first time I was here, Babe Ruth hit a home run up into those seats. And to me, like, he might as well have said he knew the Queen of England, or like he had walked on the moon or something. To a 10-year-old boy, there couldn't have possibly been something more legendary or epic to have seen or been a part of.
But it's for looks.
And I think that kind of captures what my grandparents were like to me. They were from this epic generation and lived these epic lives that seemed so sensational and full of life. And I remember being young and just being in awe of the endless arsenal of stories that they had and that they had lived through. And I remember actually being a little depressed, like thinking when I was young, like, there's no way that I can ever live a life with as many stories and experiences that they've had. And there's another one. I just remember one Christmas, I got a book for Christmas. It was Day of the Jackal by Frederick Forsyth. And on the About the Author page, it talked about his life and how he flew a de Havilland Vampire jet in World War II. And Granddad just said, "Oh, that's the plane I learned to fly." And I was like 25 years old, and I didn't even know that he flew a plane. It had never come up. I guess I knew he had joined the Royal Navy, but I didn't know what his role was. And he told stories about flying up and down the English countryside, learning to fly. And he said that right when he finished his training, the war ended. So he never actually flew in the war. But that was like a throwaway story for him. It had never come up, but that's like the life he lived, and the epicness of it all. And everyone, I think, here knows what an incredible storyteller he was. I think, well, really, to me, I think the two greatest storytellers in the world were my two grandparents, Annie and Granddad. I know everyone's supposed to feel that way about their grandparents, but it's just true. They were the best storytellers. And I know I've just lived my life trying to be like them and trying to enjoy life and experience life the way that they did. And they are undoubtedly my heroes. And I just hope I can live a life just even close to the one that they lived, and have a fraction of the experiences that they had, because they were just such incredible people. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Hi, maybe I could step in now. This is Peter Kemp. Is that okay? Have you got me?
Go ahead, Peter.
Hi, everyone. Hi. I'm Peter Kemp. I'm Peter's nephew and the youngest son of Margaret, who was Peter's big sister. And her younger brothers referred to Margaret, I later learned, as the boss. And just so that Peter never forgot it, my mother loved referring to him as her kid brother, putting him firmly in his place. Well, for me, he was my namesake. I was the one who was given his name, and the connection felt special. And my first memory of meeting Uncle Peter is from 1961 in Connecticut. And as I recall, Peter and Anne had just bought the house on Jacob Street, but not yet moved in. But in Peter, I remember a huge, smiling presence, great energy, and an incredibly warm welcome. Peter had this ability to make even a little kid feel part of things, and helped bring us, my older brother David and myself, a sense of belonging to something larger than our small family over on this side of the Atlantic. Now, there were to be many, many later encounters spread over 6 decades in the US, here in the UK, and it was always a treat to see Peter and Anne and to share, however briefly, in their positive, spirited outlook. And to me, they were always special. They could light up a room, they laughed easily, and they had a real joie de vivre. Peter was somebody who was happy in his own skin, and he conveyed that ease and happiness to others. And for those qualities, I'll always be thankful. The last time I saw Peter was at Anne's memorial. And his parting shot as I left to catch the train was to recall his many trips to London over the years. And it still rings in my ears. "We're coming over." Well, he never made it, of course, but he left his mark on us all. And for that, I'll always be grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you, Jeremy. If there's anybody else who'd like to share, just jump right in.
There, Mom, you can
I'll
speak.
go. Oh, someone.
Do you want to speak, Mom?
Hi.
Yeah. And me?
No, we'll go next. It's this girl.
Can I go?
Hmm?
Go.
She's
Wait, hold on one moment, Amanda.
Okay.
Wait one moment. Thank you. Go ahead. Who is there?
Me?
I think
Oh, I
Judy
guess we
Ailey
lost.
was trying to speak, Jenny.
I'm sorry, who was that?
I think Judith Ailey was trying.
Yes, okay, Judy, yes, Judy.
Hi.
Anna Ailey, go
Actually,
ahead.
yeah. Janet, oh, did we just lose it? Oh, shoot.
No, I can hear you.
Yeah. Okay, Mom, you can say something. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say that Peter Law was one of the kindest men I've ever met. That says a whole lot more than just the simple sentences I made. Oh,
there you are.
Look at the face. I remember her. Oh,
Thank you so much, Janet. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's good to see you. We're waiting friends.
we're waiting friend indeed.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here, and Judy for helping her to be here. That's wonderful.
Not at all.
Okay.
I'd like to say something. This is Mary.
Go ahead, Mary. Yeah.
So I'm Mary Russell. I'm one of 6 children of Jim and Jeanette Russell. And my father and Peter went to Choate together. And they also went to Princeton together. And my memories really are about the whole Law family. And once a year, the Laws would come up to northern Vermont, where my family grew up, and rent the red farmhouse at the base. Oh, come right at the base of Burke Mountain. And every 5 years at Princeton reunions. And I always, until today, I always thought my father and Peter were in the same class of 48. And maybe can someone, Jenny, because they always had the same outfit on, which was specific about each class. So am I correct or incorrect in that?
You're correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
you're
anyway,
correct.
some of my best childhood memories are with the whole Law family. And after listening to everybody's description of him as a father and as a person, it's really quite evident why Peter was one of my father's best friends. And my father died in 2012. And I remember it was Stephanie and John and Peter and Ann came out to Colorado where I was living. And I met them at Beaver Creek where I used to live. And I remember sitting with them. And I don't remember what year it was. It was after my father had died. And I remember how it was like being with my father, sitting with Peter. And they had identical qualities. And just the peace and the humor, the intelligence, and specifically the lack of judgment. There was always such a kind way about both Peter and Ann. And it was always a sense of peace to be around the whole family. And we would go down to Rowayton. It wasn't every summer, I don't think. But I remember the times that we did go. We had a large yard in Vermont, and the Laws were up there in the winter, and we'd go down to Rowayton for some summers. And it was always our longest trip other than Princeton that we did as a family. And it was just fun to see the creativity. I think our families were similar in that way, in the level of artistic, I would say, affluence, both in Ann's creativity in what she made, and as well as my mother's, and very different. But it was a similar feeling being both at my house and at the Laws house. And so I appreciate being invited to this. And I, just speaking for the Russell children, really appreciate just knowing the whole family.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you so much for coming. And I guess I'd have to say that next to Jonathan, your dad probably knew my father the longest.
Right. Yeah, I think they met when they were 15.
Yeah.
So
thank you so much.
All right, thanks.
There's a few people I know are sort of waiting, so I'll just call on a few people right now. If I saw Bill Collins, I saw you jump in. If you want to jump in now, that would be wonderful. Unless I had it wrong, in which case you can say so and I'll call on somebody else.
Me?
Yeah, go ahead, Bill. Did you want to say something? Bill, I think you need to unmute yourself. Go to the right hand, go to the little button there in the, yeah, there you go.
Muted up again.
Yeah, there you go. We can hear you now.
I'm not to be trusted on these modern devices. So not my strength. Fortunately, in my checkered career, I've had the opportunity to meet an enormous number of citizens, good and bad. And it has always struck me that Peter was the ideal citizen in the British sense, in the Norwegian literary sense, in the American sense. If there's such a thing as a good citizen that makes the country work, Peter was an amazing example, whatever he turned his mind to. I've even forgiven him for working for the fossil fuel industry. That wasn't easy, but he's more than overcome that. Peter was always there when the community needed a leader. And communities normally need leaders. And so I've looked on him as a great example, and I point him out to younger people who are coming along in the trade. And I would say Jenny is a marvelous offspring from that tradition. She went to a great deal of trouble to testify in Hartford on the Death with Dignity bill a couple of years ago, and had it all down in writing and made a big impression on an awful lot of people. And although that bill has not yet passed, it will. And Jenny's testimony.
Your microphone just went, there we go.
Jenny's testimony was the strongest that the Capitol has seen. And so hopefully that's a sign that highest level of citizenship passes on from generation to generation. And Peter was a great foundation for that. And I'm very pleased to be among the family on this day to recognize that.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. It's so good to see you. Amanda?
Hi. My name is Amanda, and I didn't have anything planned, so if I fumble, I'm sorry. But I had the privilege of working for Jenny a couple years ago, and part of that was keeping Peter company. And every day I would deliver the New York Times to him, and we'd split a sandwich at lunch and we'd read the paper. And one thing I always remember is I would listen to music when I was working around the house, and it was a lot of the Beatles and Paul Simon and Carole King, and he remembered every word. And he was just such a good person. And when Jenny gave me his poncho, it made me realize that we created a pretty cool friendship, and he always had a way of making you appreciate the little things in life. So I feel very honored to have known him. So thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Glad to see you wearing the poncho.
Can I say something about that poncho?
Yeah. Go ahead.
So, my name is Amy Lake, and I'm a long friend of Jenny's and her whole family. And that poncho made Pedro to me. And whenever I'd stop by, which was pretty frequently, Pedro and I used to dance a lot. So it was really nice, Stephanie, to see those videos. And I'm glad this is recorded because I can get the link and watch him dance to A Kiss to Build a Dream On and all the other greats. So he is missed.
Thank you, Amy. When my dad knew that I was going to go see you or go do something with you, he would say, "Tell Amy that Pedro said hello." So he loved that nickname that you gave him.
Can I go?
Dick Giordano. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead,
Okay.
John.
First of all, I'll wear a hat in his memory. I never knew about "Oh How I Hate to Get Up in the Morning" song. First time it's come to me, and I can certainly relate to that. As you may remember, when I came to visit the many times, especially when we were on home leave, when I was a kid, I was probably the last in the whole household to get up in the mornings. And relating to today, I was a little bit groggy from melatonin this morning, but I did make it up. I don't have anything pre-planned, but I did print up the obituary from the Norwalk Hour that you had sent in their first notification. And, you know, Peter really lived a full life, and I didn't appreciate all the things that he did when I knew him. And because he was so, as someone else had mentioned, modest and understated in a lot of things. He just did a lot. He was a person of action, and he never would brag about anything. And yet he did so much. I always considered him a quote unquote man of action, partly because I have a history of being somewhat inactive. But I do remember some of the times, one time in particular when we were boating out on the Long Island Sound, and a storm came up, and we tried to come about 3, maybe 4 times, and he finally looked at me, glared at me, and says, "John, just pull on the rope." And but he didn't let on that maybe he was a little more nervous than he could have been, because as we were approaching some rocks, some shoals, not too far away, and we were heading right at him, but we fortunately did come about the next time around. And the other mini story I have is that it's not really a story, but my cousins will remember this fondly and well. Is that he would typically hand me a rake on Thanksgiving Day and just give me a look like, "All right, go out there and help." But underneath it all, even though Peter didn't always express what was going on inside, he was a very giving and compassionate person. He, again, was understated in a lot of ways, but he had that sort of glint in his eyes. You knew there was something more behind. Sometimes he did a lot of things that were he never spoke about, but were really compassionate and caring, including visiting my dad on a regular basis while my dad had Alzheimer's in a nursing home. I would visit often, and he would often be there when I was there. So I appreciated, even though while growing up, thought he's a little tough on me. That's what I needed, and he was just a wonderful person all the way around, and he lived a very full life, and I'm very grateful for having known him. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much. How about Dick Giordano?
Hi, this is Dick Giordano. I go way back with Peter. I met him in 1963, just short of 60 years ago, when I moved to Rowayton with 3 children, a wife. And I quickly saw that Peter was one of those people who discovered early in life that life is a gift, and he was determined to live it to the full. I remember those cold winter days when we were shoveling the snow off the paddle tennis courts, wearing thick gloves and having a fair amount of antifreeze, i.e. whiskey, to ward off the cold weather. And he was a gracious winner and a generous loser, which, by the way, was seldom, and because he was a hell of a great athlete. And I remember those days because our children later on complained that they felt abandoned in those Sundays. My daughter Susan is laughing because the family was kind of living a short day after the cold playing of the courts. Peter and I shared some character building episodes, mostly on the water, and sometimes fueled by martinis, because after all, he and I were the pioneers of restoring the martini as a cocktail. In fact, we're raising a glass, 3 of them right now. Cheers to Peter. Anyway, he was an admirable stoic in that really a sterling representation of the great generation. And I feel rewarded to have seen and lived part of my life with him. And I know we all miss him.
Thank you, Dick. And thank you, Marguerite and Susan, for being there too and raising that glass. I know Alan Lovejoy, my husband, wants to say something. Alan?
Yes. Hi. You know, it was fun living with Peter. He kept things interesting. I have three things I like to say. I haven't prepared anything, though I've been thinking about it a while. First, it was the PBS NewsHour. We had to have dinner on the table and done by 7 o'clock so we could watch Judy on the PBS NewsHour.
Judy Woodruff.
Judy Woodruff, yes, thank you.
And Glenn Eiffel.
Yes, those are the two very important parts of our evenings every Monday through Friday. And at the dinner table, if a dog wanted to go out or a cat wanted to go out or come in, everything stopped. And Peter, if I didn't do it or Jenny didn't do it, Peter would get up in the middle of the meal and make sure that the animals were taken care of. He would always make sure that they had water and food, even when they had already been fed, and they get double, triple portions that particular day. He was the egg man. He was in charge of the chickens. He would sit up on the porch, and there was a certain time, it was like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He'd get the little basket to carry the eggs, and he would go out. As time went on, it would take a little bit longer for him to get out there. But he was consistent and very caring. And if there was not enough water, or he thought there was not enough water, he would take the time to fill it up. And going back to food, oftentimes Jenny was working like being the principal at the time. And so he and I would spend a lot of dinners together. And typically I would cook, or I would not cook, but make quesadillas. And quesadillas were his favorite. He just couldn't get enough of them. Quesadilla is a flour tortilla, melted cheese, and then we put chopped onions, chopped tomatoes, cottage cheese, avocado, salsa, roll it up, and then eat it. And he made his so big, they were just spilling out everywhere, but that was okay. So he loved it. So it was a good run while he was here. So we miss him. That's it.
Thank you, Alan. And always topped off with ice cream, no matter what. Sometimes more than one bowl if he forgot that he just had one. Is there anybody else that would like to jump in?
I'd love to say something from the Cones. And
Hey,
I'm
Muff.
a sister who's on some mesa in Utah, but she's been with us the whole time listening. So I'm Muffy Cone, Segvari, and appropriately, I'm in my mom's and dad's condo in New Hampshire right now. They loved it here. And it's the piece that we treasure and hold near to us from the time that we spent with them. And I bring up family and sense of place as being very important. And in my life, I think having the laws as our neighbors was one of the most important grounding things in my life. We lived next door to one another for 50 years, and I don't think that's very common anymore. But it really, no matter where we were in our phase of life, the laws were next door. And I think the beauty is knowing that they may not be next door anymore, but they're still so part of our lives. And I just want Peter to know that my brother now lives in North Carolina, and he's become a pickleball star. My brother and Peter played a lot of tennis together when my brother was growing up. And although he still plays tennis pretty well, he's now gone on to pickleball. So I imagine Peter too would have moved to pickleball in older part of his life. So Peter, you can think of Tom. He's still whacking at the ball. And to the rest of the Laws, I just want you to know you have been such an important part of my life, and to Anne and Peter's grandkids, and to Jonathan and just Gail and Tori, the whole family. Please know that the Cones are still next door in some way, and we have one piece of my parents' house remaining, so up in New Hampshire. So please come join us here, and we love you all. And this was such a lovely celebration of Peter's life. Thanks, Jenny, and everybody for putting it on.
Thank you, Muffy.
Could
Jenny.
I make a remark?
Gordon Fisher.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead, Gordon.
Thank you, Jenny. I'm Gordon Fisher, and for about 4 decades, I served on the board of PPIC with Peter. And when our company started, we had no capital, either literally or figuratively. But as it turned out, we did have one bit of capital that we didn't quite know too much about, and that was Peter Law. How we ever managed to attract the head of risk management from Schlumberger on our board, I have no idea. I wasn't the one who did it, but it was one of the most miraculous things that we ever did. When we were trying to sort of find our way in Bermuda as a small offshore captive company, somehow the doors just opened for us with Peter. Anytime we wanted to know about a management company, lawyers, the right people to know in Bermuda to run a company, Peter would just come up with the names of the people we should meet, and he would make those arrangements for us. It was a great joy. The other silver bullet that Peter brought to our board was Anne. What a dear. We just all loved her so much. And for nearly 40 years, Peter and Anne and my husband and I went on vacation together with Peter to Bermuda for the better part of a week. And so over these years, we just got to know each other so well and developed such a great friendship and affection between us. It was great. So in his memory, I would like to add my PPIC cap, which I treasure just as much as Peter did. And now I even treasure it more. And I wanted to just mention one other thing to Jeremy, because Jeremy, you mentioned about your grandfather telling you about the plane that he flew that kind of impressed you at the end. I remember one night we were having drinks together. We had cocktails every night that we were together. We were talking and something came up about Jacqueline Kennedy. I was talking about her, I remember very distinctly. And Peter just very casually said, I dated her. And I was just as impressed, Jeremy, as you were with the airplane. Maybe more. Thanks so much.
Well, I'm impressed too. Thank you so much for that. And I'm glad we share similar hats, although this one definitely is a little more tattered. Is there anybody else that would like to say something?
Jen, I think Carol Ann and Dean both raised their hands.
Great. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Hi, Dean has stepped away. I'm Carol Ann. I'm Victoria's mother and Jonathan's first wife. And I don't even know if Jonathan knows the story. I'm going to start now. Anne and Peter were so kind to me the whole time we were together. We were very young when we got married, and our marriage lasted about 7 years, and we both remarried. And about a year after I was married to my husband, Joel, we were in New York, and I called Anne to say hello, and she said, come up and visit us. I'd like to meet your new husband. They had us for a lunch. They were charming. I mean, they were lovely. And Anne said, you know, you were with our family. We always think of you that way too. And please always call if you are ever in town or need anything. And they were so nice. And to this day, I remember it as one of the most loving moments of the Law family. So they have a special place in my heart, and I'm, with you all in missing them. Okay, thanks.
Thank you for sharing that, Carol Ann. I'm so glad you could be here today with us too.
Jeff would like to talk.
Go ahead, Jeff. Thank
Um,
you.
I'm very camera shy, so I have to forgive that. I can't look at myself. My parents were Rose and Charlie Hamill, and Rose went to, I think, the New York School of Dramatic Arts with Margaret Kemp. And Peter wound up coming to the United States for a time before he was in the Navy. I don't know the exact details of it, but that's how Peter knew my family, and he lived with Rose and Charlie for a while. So in that sense, I've known Peter for 8 to 10 years before I was born. And then I was born in 1951. In 1955, our family moved to Tucson, Arizona, and my father was very, very ill for a long time, but every few years, Rose would go back east to visit, and that's when I got to see Peter and Ann. And so I remember the house in Rowayton very, very well, and it was something we kept doing for years and years and years and years. And every time we went, it was a wonderful event. I remember a number of times Ann took us to the sculpture garden, PepsiCo. And it was great fun wandering around there looking at the sculpture and the art, but I actually prefer the house, looking at Ann's work, which I've always really loved. We still have bits and pieces all around. When my father died in 1968, we buried his ashes. We scattered his ashes, not buried, scattered his ashes along Island Sound and rented a boat with Peter and Ann and Rose and went out. And then when my mother died, Rose died in 1996, Agnes, my wife, and I and Peter and Ann rented a boat and scattered her ashes in roughly the same place. And the boat ride out there, they've hired this young man for the boat, and it was the choppiest boat ride that any of us have ever had. With bam, 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 bam. And so it made it memorable in that way too. So just every time we saw them, although I never grew up with them, lived near them. I never lived near them continuously, at least I can remember. But I mean, every time we saw them was a wonderful experience. And sitting around, we'd stay at their house for a couple of days here and there. We just sitting around talking, just a wonderful thing. It's wonderful to know them. And we came up to the farm, Jenny's farm.
Yeah, Jenny and Alan's place.
Once before Ann died. That was a wonderful experience too. Just knowing them was great.
Thank you, Jeff. I met Peter and Ann, of course, on my honeymoon, because when Jeff and I were married in 1991, that's where Jeff wanted to go on our honeymoon, is to New York and Connecticut and visit his people. And so that's what we did. That's wonderful. I know when you came to visit, so Jeff and Agnes live in Seattle, and they came to visit us here in Falls Village to visit my parents in 2015, after my parents both moved in. And then after my mom died, Jeff called monthly to talk to my father and check in for the rest of his life, which was just a wonderful, wonderful thing. Can't thank you enough for that, Jeff. Is there anybody else that would like to say anything?
I would, Jen.
Could I say something?
Okay, I see Albert on the screen. How about we go with Albert, and then there was another person, I'm not sure.
Sally.
Sally, okay, go ahead, Albert.
Hi, I'm Al Januvis, married to Amy Lake, who spoke earlier, and we've been friends with Jenny and Alan for a long time. Not as long as them. Actually, Amy tried to match me up with Jenny, and at the party that I went to meet Jenny, there she was with Alan. So a few short years later, I was married to Amy. But I know Peter through them and through two activities that we shared, and that is drinking and gambling. And I've recently come to the world of cocktails in the last couple of years, and also a wonderful radio program, which I only learned about too late to really get Peter into. It's called the Retro Cocktail Hour, and it comes out of Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas, and I recommend it to everyone who's having cocktails once a week and toasting Peter, because it's the strangest music, tiki music from the 50s and 60s, and show music and weird stuff that I think Peter would mostly appreciate, and certainly the cocktails, because it comes from the underground martini bunker and in Kansas City, Kansas. So, but anyway, once a month we would play poker. Al and I get together with a bunch of friends, and for several years, as the host rotated through the various houses, usually every 4 months we'd end up at the Law Lovejoy residence, and Peter would join us for poker, and it was really a delight, and he enjoyed it very much. And he was forgetful. We had to remind him several times what the game was and how it worked. And I'm not sure how much of that was real, because man, he could really play a poker face and zing us by the very end of the round, and it was great. And I'm going to miss that very much. And while there was all this talk of tomato juice and cocktails, even though it's 2:30 in the afternoon, I made myself a Bloody Mary, and I'm almost done with it and done with this. But loved Peter. I loved the whole family, and thank you for having this. You did a great job with this. And that's pretty much it.
Thank you, Albert. I think Gail, Gail, were you trying to jump in?
And I was.
Oh, Sally. Okay, go ahead,
Yeah,
Sally.
too.
Yep.
I would like to as well.
Okay. All right. How about Sally?
Okay, I will go. So I wanted to make a slight addendum or maybe correction to Stephanie's story. So now I've known Peter since the early 70s. Jenny and I met in high school, and we're close friends for a very long time. And I had many wonderful visits with Peter, visiting Jenny and Alan in Falls Village. And a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to fly with Peter to California. And we had a great time flying out there. But one thing I have to say is cocktail hour did not wait until 5 o'clock. We had a morning flight. And Peter had at least his first drink on the first leg on the way to South Carolina or somewhere, wherever the first leg was. And then another one between there and San Francisco. So I think by the time we arrived in San Francisco, it might have been 5 o'clock, but I attribute it all to his confusion about the time, what time zone we were in, and that, it was probably 5 o'clock somewhere. But it was a wonderful trip. We had a great time, and I'm so glad that I had that with him. So thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Okay, Gail. Gail, are you there?
Gail, you're on mute.
Gail, are you on mute? You have to unmute yourself because we can't hear you.
I think Jonathan's coming to rescue.
So in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a little microphone. Go ahead and click on that. Okay. Okay, great. Go ahead, Gail.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, let me talk about Miss Technology. If I hadn't, I was using my finger, not my mouse. Oh, well. Anyway, I just want to say one thing, just briefly.
the best thing that ever happened in my life was marrying into the Law family. And I loved Ann and Peter so much, and their children are just a testament to what fine people they were. And I just wanted to say that. That's all. So, thank you.
Thank you, Gail. We miss you, everybody. Eileen.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eileen Wilkinson, and I grew up down the street from the Law family. They were the coolest family in town. They had a goose. It was the coolest pet to have. And I would never dare call Mr. Law Peter. He was always Mr. Law to me. And I remember loving their gardens. Their home was just like a castle. Loved Ann's sculptures and everything about their homestead there. And I also remember playing in the Cohen's yard, playing football, and also all of the games that we played in, on the Law's property as well. And I didn't get the memo on the cocktails beforehand, but this is actually peach mango iced tea. And I will do a toast at 5 o'clock for him. There's still lots of barn chores to do before I have a cocktail. And I actually learned something that I, all of my life, didn't know, that Mr. Law played the prophet Isaiah in the nativity pageant at Rowayton School. I always thought he was God. And that's a little testament there, because he was a really awesome man and left an impression on my heart. And it was great to have known him and all of the Law family. So, and this is my brother Chuck. He also.
Hi, everybody.
So, anyway.
Hi, Chuck.
It's really
Jenny,
wonderful to
Stephanie,
see everybody. Yep, he's there.
Thank you. So great that you could both be here.
Yes, we feel honored to be a part of this. Thank you.
Great.
And what a lovely celebration of his life.
Thank you.
Great.
Is there anybody else? We might be winding down. Okay, so.
Oh,
has
has
his
his hand raised. Could I say
Okay, yep, go ahead, Kari.
All right. Well, I was a latecomer to the Law train. I got to know you guys in the early 90s when I became friends with Hillary and was dating her. And some of you have referred to Peter's generosity of spirit. I was a very immature 26-year-old, and I can remember meeting Hillary and her dad, and I loved the kind of old-fashioned way of talking that he had. He was going to go out to dinner with Hillary, and he said, Kari, are you footloose? Would you like to join us? And I just felt so accepted. And then I joined you guys for an Easter celebration, I think, not having met any of you. And Annie had sewn Easter pants for all the females in the family, and I got a pair of Easter pants. I've never had a pair of Easter pants before. And that's not to mention the killer game of poker, the fun games of tag that Anthony always won because he was so dang fast. I just left that weekend feeling like, wow, these people know how to have a good time, and almost learning a lot too. So, and then of course I got to know Peter as a grandfather to Hazel, but yeah, anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Kari.
Hey, Jenny, can I pop in for a little bit?
Go ahead, Dave.
Hey, everyone. My name is Dave. I am also one of the lucky few to marry into the Law family. And I only knew Peter from about when Hannah and I started dating in 2016, 2015. So although I only knew him for about 5 years, he left an impact on my life as if I had known him for my whole life. The way that he could just make me feel comfortable and included without even saying anything was just really meaningful to me when I was first meeting the family and first coming down to Connecticut. And I have some great memories of just sitting in the living room with him, and I'd just be playing some guitar and he would be tapping his feet, and sharing music with him was something that I really cherished. And also the last memory I have of Peter was him sitting out on the porch on a beautiful summer day while Hannah and I were building our arbor for our wedding. And I feel like that was just a really meaningful last memory for me to have of him. And I miss him a lot and I love him.
Thank you, Dave. I'm so glad he got a chance to know you. Okay, so if there isn't anybody else, I think that if there aren't any other comments, we're going to end with a wonderful tribute that was sent to us from a colleague of my father's. And then we're going to move on to the slideshow. And so once the slideshow starts, we won't be back on. So before this last tribute, I just wanted to thank everybody. We all, Stephanie, Hillary, Anthony, and I wanted to thank everybody for coming today and joining us for these 2 hours, and tell you that we really miss you. And having this be over is sort of a final event, but we hope that it's not the last that we connect with all of you, because that's what helps us to keep going and to remember all of the things that we know and the people that we know and all those connections. So thank you everybody for coming, and we'll go on to our final tribute, followed by our slideshow.
Okay, I'm John Gavello. Stephanie is my wife. So Peter was my father-in-law. I'm going to read a message that was sent by Chris Leita. And Chris was a colleague and friend of Peter's. He worked at Schlumberger with him. And he says, "As you are no doubt aware, your father was a very special person in my life, and his influence remains strong. Peter was a wonderful example and mentor to a young man close to the start of his professional life. He had many attributes which he never flaunted. Included among them, he was smart, a consummate professional with deep domain knowledge and unflagging curiosity to access and exploit new ideas. He was wise, especially when dealing with senior executives, tough senior executives, or when negotiating complex transactions with folk who were not easy to deal with. He could read people, difficult people, well, and his natural charm and tendency to underplay his hand until the vital moment often won the day. He was cultured. It was no happenstance that his first professional calling was as an English teacher. He could talk about many things to people of many different hues, and he was economic and precise with his use of the written word. He was humorous. I'm sure many people will highlight this great quality. Peter did not need much encouragement to introduce an element of humor into even the driest of conversations. If there was fun to be found in a business transaction or business relationship, Peter would seek it out. Above all, Peter was a kind man. He made a tough business world and a rough company much more bearable because of his unfailing support, his generosity of spirit, and his fundamental good nature. He was always keen to give credit to others and jump to the defense of members of his team if they were being unduly pressured. He was a model of integrity and humanity, qualities that are too rarely seen in the current world. To me, your father was a rare combination, both an inspiration and a good friend. Please accept my fond and best wishes and those of Agnes, and rest assured, our thoughts will be with your family tomorrow. Chris.